Hello, everyone. I'm Philip Norman. I'm here with my colleague Smo Ozawa, and we're speaking with longtime broadcaster and journalist Ray Suarez. And the title of today's conversation is How Everywhere Can Be Home for All. So, Ray, in your recent book, We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century, reading that book really informed this podcast that Smo and I made about immigration in rural America. And your voice is featured on the show. So to start off, could you just tell us a little bit about how immigration is reshaping rural America?
Well, Philip, it is a very old story and a very new one at the same time, which makes it one of the more interesting inquiries in American history right now. Of course, the 19th century story is very much an immigrant story, but now the 21st century one is as well. When the laws were changed in 1965 to reopen America to large immigrant flows, people started to come from different places in the world. And what had largely been, in the modern era, a coastal and border phenomenon became an everywhere phenomenon. So now immigrants are the backbone in many places of the rural economy, the agricultural economy, the small town economy, in places where there really had never been or hadn't been high levels of immigration in more than a century. And so it's retelling a very old story, but with a new twist, because people are coming from different places. They were not used to having Somalis in Minnesota. They were not used to having Eritreans in Iowa. They were not used to having Mexicans in communities in the Dakotas. This is a new story and an old one at the same time, and it is forcing people who are the great-great-great-grandsons and daughters of immigrants to rethink what immigration means.
Besides the immigration focus, can you share a story or two from your experiences reporting in rural America about other types of changes that you've seen in these rural places?
It has been, in some places, comfortable and really not particularly dramatic, where the economic necessity has merged with the presence of people and the readiness of people to dig in and go to work. And in some places, it's been very tense. In northeastern Pennsylvania, there's an old industrial town, Hazleton, which had glory days earlier in the 20th century, but a lot of the industries that fueled the growth of Hazleton had long since closed. The place was declining in population, census after census. And then people priced out of the New York City real estate market, started to move west from the New York metropolitan area, and settled in Hazleton. Dominicans from the New York metropolitan area. This was turned into a political cause by politicians who saw an opening, saw an opportunity to capitalize on the discomfort of people with arrivals who spoke Spanish, who had a different view of what a main street should look like, who wanted to buy houses cheaply and fix them up. And there were some ugly years in Hazleton. Well, now the city has been growing for 2 census in a row, now is roughly 50% Latino, has a mayor who recognizes that a healthy business community and a healthy, coherent, vibrant economy in Hazleton means embracing rather than shunning the new Dominican population.
Yeah, well, I think another direction we wanted to go in this conversation is just, beyond the specific focus of immigration, how else, just as someone who's reported in rural America, how else have you seen rural America change, in over the years you've been reporting?
So there are rural places that have had to struggle with the way that marketplaces sort workers, with the way people move around the country. And there are places like North Dakota in the fracking boom, where they can't build new housing fast enough, and young men leave their families behind to work. They'll work some long string of weeks straight and then get a week off and drive 1,000 miles to get back home to their wives and kids. But they're making fabulous money extracting oil and gas from places that had been kind of forgotten about. There isn't one, as you guys know very well, there isn't one rural American story anymore. There's multiple stories because different things are happening in different places that force different kind of changes on people who might have hoped that life would stay pretty stable and predictable and sustainable over time. And sudden wealth is changing the nature of places. There are counties in Idaho where people are building second homes, counties in Wyoming where people are from rich, faraway places are building second homes. And suddenly there's a demand for an airstrip so that private aviation can bring these people to their homes. There's a demand for better roads and better paving, where most of the people had been driving pickup trucks and they weren't too worried about some more economically built chip and seal surface roads. And now people want better roads. And yet, if you're a cop, if you're a teacher, if you're a firefighter, if you're a nurse, you may be getting priced out of the community where you live in, central Colorado, in southern Idaho, by new people and people moving in from the coasts. So it's what makes America a fascinating place to cover, a challenging place to cover, and it's what forces us to always have to deal with new challenges.
The theme for everywhere this year is abundance and how the pie is big enough for all of us. Can you share some examples you've come across of how storytelling has the power to shift these instincts of scarcity-minded isolation back into attitudes of collaboration and abundance that include these rural newcomers?
One of the saddest parts of the national conversation, the national discourse around immigration, is the belief among a lot of our fellow citizens that this is a zero-sum game, that if someone is getting something, that means there's less for me. For me, it shows a fundamental lack of faith in what America has pulled off pretty successfully for now 250 years. That idea of a growing pie, that idea of innovation and smart, strategic, forward-looking growth, making sure there's enough for everybody. We've sort of lost that faith. We don't any longer believe that this country can provide for all. And so once you've taken that on board, you can't believe that people arriving from another place in the world are actually going to grow that pie and get a share for themselves, and there'll still be plenty for you. When farms become more productive with a new supply of workers from a different place in the world, that doesn't mean there's going to be less milk or less cheese, or that it's going to be more expensive and you're not going to be able to have what you need and not be able to get what you want. Over and over and over again through American history, sometimes to the great detriment and tremendous suffering and self-sacrifice of people coming from other places in the world, America has continued to grow. Whether it's immigrants building the Transcontinental Railroad, whether it's immigrants who are trooping into the blast furnaces in Pittsburgh and Youngstown every 8 hours to pull off a shift, building the steel that's building the country, coking plants, whether it's people in the Chicago stockyards who were all immigrants, who were very heavily immigrant, making food for a protein-hungry country 120 years ago. These are all examples of the way that immigrants had been able to grow the economy, make more for all, and get a foothold themselves in this place.
In your travels, have you witnessed any sort of turnaround points where people have gone from that zero-sum mindset to more of an acceptance of the contributions these newcomers are making?
I think if you look at a place like Iowa, about 25, 30 years ago, the governor at the time said, look, we have a great public education system. And when Iowa kids finish their college educations, a lot of them leave. They go to Chicago and they go to Kansas City and they go to New York to make their fortunes. And they're not staying here to farm. So we're going to have to accept people coming in from other places in the country. And Iowa has become a place that immigrants have gone to. Like I said at the beginning, this is no longer a coastal and border phenomenon any longer. And so, yes, they've become part of the fabric of the place. The next chapter that's yet to be written is to think about what happens next. I was sitting at a Formica table in a diner in western Iowa, the most Dutch county in America. So the grandsons and great-grandsons of Dutch people who came to the United States, very successful farms. They run beautiful operations, productive, comfortable. They've made great lives for themselves and their families. But I asked all these farmers sitting around the table, are any of your kids staying here to farm? And they all looked at each other. They looked around the table and they said, no, none of our kids are going to stay. I said, well, a lot of the work being done, I had just been at the grain elevator earlier that morning. A lot of the work being done in that county was being done by Mexican and Central American immigrants. And I said, well, can you see them owning your farms one day? And again, there was a long pause. And all of them said that they were great workers and they understood farming well and they knew how to make the place productive and functional. But they said that they couldn't see these men running their farms someday and owning their farms someday because you had to amass so much capital in the 21st century to buy any of that land, to buy combines and harvesters and the other equipment involved in big production farming, that they couldn't imagine how these hardworking men could ever borrow enough or save enough to buy their farms. And that is a real problem. It could very easily all end up in the hands of enormous multinational agricultural corporations. I guess people are going to have to think about and talk about whether that's the result that they really want. ConAgra is not going to have any problem buying farmland. They've never had any problem before. So what happens in the future is a really big challenge for us all. But at the same time, all those farmers around the table understood that the men who had come there from other places in the world were essential now to the farming economy and good workers that they could rely on, which is a good thing.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, Ray, for speaking with us again. Like I said, your voice was a really big help in kind of helping us stitch together the story for this podcast about rural immigration. And yeah, we just appreciated hearing a little bit more from you around other aspects of life and challenges in rural America today.
Well, thanks for having me with you, and us admitting we need each other is not a bad thing.
Agreed.
Agreed.